Welcome. My name's Dr. Maria Kempinska, and I am more than delighted to speak to Dr. Anna Erat. She's a medical director of Herslander Clinic in Zurich, which is very cold at the moment. And she's in charge of both preventative medicine and personalized medicine. Now, I'm a psychologist, so I'm always interested in the uniqueness of the individual. And that's why we're speaking here with Dr. Erat or Dr. Anna. And what is most intriguing about you, from my perspective, being in the UK, is that you competed as a skier and as a mono bobslayer, and you're in sports medicine, and you're a medical director for an ice hockey team and also for Formula One drivers. How exciting. There is so much more to you, and your knowledge is extensive. So can you please add a little bit more to your background and your day-to-day work, please?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here today. So, and an honor as well. So it's great. And as I said before we started the recording, it's getting colder and colder here. And on one hand, I'm sad to wave goodbye to the summer, but on the other hand, it's wonderful to start the winter season, the monobob sledding and the skiing. So as you rightly said, that is my background in terms of a profession, but also in terms of my own private experience. So very in my youth, I was an alpine skier, and later on I became a skiing instructor in the skiing school of St. Moritz, and that in many ways also shaped my professional career. That's one of the reasons why I decided to go into sports medicine, go into taking care of the ice hockey team. We also been taking care of some skiers from Swiss Ski. And so in many ways, that shaped also my interest in sports medicine, longevity medicine, and what I'm doing right now. You said also very rightly so that I used to be a medical director at Herslander, which is the biggest, largest private hospital group in Switzerland. At the moment, I'm consulting a few of the centers, particularly in the field of longevity and in the field of sports medicine. And I also, for more than 10 years, I worked as a chief medical officer for the female ice hockey team, the junior female ice hockey team for Swiss ice hockey. So I traveled the world with various teams, which was absolutely great fun, and in a way opened the door for thinking about performance, optimizing health, and in the end, longevity medicine.
It's so fascinating what you're doing, Anna. And I think being independent, you're a consultant, you can take experiences, that not only your personal experiences, but the experiences with ice hockey teams. And I love the fact that you're working with women in ice hockey, because is it quite a new field for ice hockey and women? Is this developing? Because over here, football is just developing for women, but there's a different training approach to women over here. As far as I know, my last understanding of women in football was that women had to pay for their own training, men didn't. So there's still a lot of barriers to be broken for women to take up the training effectively. But also this will break the mold for a lot of women, your understanding, in sport. How much will that help women in general?
You're absolutely right. So both ice hockey and football, or soccer, if you will, have become more of an interest now also in terms of female athletes and female teams. And I'm, of course, thrilled to see that. And it is developing in the right direction. Females have, of course, been playing ice hockey and football for a long period of time, but it hasn't really been supported on a systematic in a systematic fashion, and also financially speaking. So I think it's fascinating and wonderful to see that there's more and more really effort also on a political level through, for instance, IIHF, which is an international body for ice hockey, to how much they are putting emphasis and also now resources into female athletes in the field of ice hockey and in the field of soccer. And I think that due to the fact that there's a political will and there is more interest as well and more money in the field, I think that gives visibility to women that are involved in these these disciplines. And once you have visibility and once you then create interest, that can, of course, also then be translated into the general population. And this is, of course, wonderful because we want females, just like men, we want females and young girls to early on engage also in team sports. And from a medical point of view, this is also extremely important because when we talk about longevity, when we talk about prevention, when we talk about health, it really starts at a very, very young age. The field of longevity medicine doesn't start once you hit 60 or 70. It starts even before you're born. So actually, when you're still a fetus, when you're in your mother, during pregnancy, longevity medicine starts already there.
So there's so much that is being uncovered and that you've touched on here. But your own experience, tell me about that as a competitive sports person. They were in that field, and how exciting. But how did you cope both mentally and physically with the pressure of being in sports?
I think you almost have to look at it the other way around. I think being in sports helps you to cope with the stress of everyday life. Of course, in sports, you're under stress. You can be under tremendous stress right before a race. But usually these kind of adrenaline rushes and the cortisol spikes, they are quite short. They are right before the race. And then after the race, the situation should at least normalize again. There are all kinds of coping mechanisms to do that, to come back to a base level. And that is something I think that you can translate into the business world as well. Because in the business world nowadays, you are under tremendous pressure when you're in the boardroom or you're in front of your boss and you have to deliver results, a presentation. And so coping with that and being able to handle short-term stress and then try to calm down again afterwards is something that you also learn in sports and can translate that later on in life to your professional career. So I think it's really only beneficial.
And there you are. You're now very much part of a team with the women's ice hockey. But in business, and I've been in a boardroom, you understand what that's like. And women do shy away from the boardroom. And I quite understand that. But as in any team or if you're in a sport, you have mentors that help you deliver what you need to do. So before you go on the field or the ice skating rink to actually compete, you have a group of people that are mentoring you, or one in particular that helps you. You don't have that in business as much. Women are not given the mentorship the way that you are in sport. So women have to learn this in a different way. And it is very different for women. But what was your experience?
You're absolutely spot on when it comes to mentoring. Mentoring, I think, is one of the key factors of success on so many different levels. And so I'm very proactive in that field. Actually, I'm a mentor at the ETH. ETH is a university here in Zurich that specializes in, well, they have all kinds of faculties, but I'm in the management area, supporting young doctoral students, master students, particularly also female students, and they have a structured mentoring program in place, and we really try to mentor these young, brilliant students early on already. And I must say that from my own experience, I was extremely fortunate to have brilliant mentors, particularly in the US, where a lot of times they are a little bit more advanced in these mentoring programs. And I had some amazing mentors while I was at Harvard Medical School, and I really want to give back, and I try to give that back in form of mentoring. And so what I also tell students, because I teach in various universities, I tell them also to proactively look for mentors. A lot of times just like you, like me, we would be delighted to be asked to help out and mentor. And so sometimes you might not have to wait for to be accepted to a mentoring program at your university or your school or your in early stages of your career at a company, but sometimes it's really worth being very proactive and looking for your mentors. And so I can only encourage that, and it's definitely an investment very worth. Yeah.
So here we are, we're talking about, and Harvard is one of the top, sort of universities, and you're at the top of your field. But how can women, so we're talking not only to women of this level, we're talking to the everyday person that want not only young people, not only mothers and, sort of women in this field, in health, in psychology, in a number of fields, in sports, but also we're talking to the ordinary person. How can they find a mentor? What do they look for? Are there certain areas? So let's take physiology, for example, the physical aspect. You deal with your understanding of various Apple watches or you talked about different shirts that are going to monitor our heart rate and all these wonderful new technologies that are going to help us. But on a day-to-day level, to translate that, who do we turn to find out what that means just for the ordinary person? And are men more attuned to that than women?
I think it totally depends on the context that you're in. So a lot of times you might also turn to family members or to friends or elderly that have maybe accompanied you throughout life. There's a lot of wisdom that can be brought in from your very immediate surrounding. So it doesn't have to always be a formal kind of a report. It can really be also an informal. It can also be someone that's close to you and has been for many years. So I don't think you always have to be in a elite university context or also working for a top-notch company. It can really be someone just in your vicinity. So I think it depends very much on where you are and where you're standing. But the key is also for you yourself to be proactive and look for opportunities, because I think there are so many people out there that have the knowledge, have the skills, have the experience, and would absolutely love to help. And particularly now that we see also a demographic shift where the general global population is getting older, there's quite a substantial fraction of the population that hits retirement age, but they still don't really want to do nothing. They're looking for new opportunities to help, to contribute to society, to contribute to organizations, to companies. And also here, I see with the demographic shift, I see actually not only dangers, but really opportunities, particularly in tapping in there and having these elderly people that might have to go into retirement, as certain surgeons, for instance. It's just illegal, or pilots. They are not allowed to work after a certain age, but they probably still want to transfer their knowledge and contribute. And it's also good to tap in there and see, as a younger person, can I find someone there that could mentor me, that could help me, that could allow me to improve and reach whatever I want to reach. So great opportunities there as well.
Who do you turn to? Who is your mentor?
I have a few, but maybe the most supportive one over the past 20 years would be a specific professor from Harvard Medical School that I worked with actually two of them that I worked with very closely. One is a woman, and one who's now at Brown University on the East Coast, and the other one is still at Harvard Medical School. But they have been tremendously supportive for the past 20-25 years, and so I'm still in contact with them.
So the work you're doing, of course, you actually sort of give the information, you divulge the information to other people. This is what we're doing. And if you look at personalized and preventative medicine, which medicine is, it's supportive, it's, sort of helps. And you're also talking about longevity. But if you looked at the personalized aspect, that's the holy grail of medicine, isn't it? It's such a big subject.
Absolutely. And we are living in an era of personalized medicine. I mean, it's just a fact. We have to personalize, we have to look at the individual and collectively, of course, on the general population as a whole. But we do need to focus on, in very often, also on the individual needs and individual constitutions.
And does medicine, obviously, sort of people will go and they'll pay for personalized medicine, but when it looks at your genetics, how far can they go with genetics? Do they take into account the culture, that you can take into account what the person's eating and their diet and so on, and obviously their mental health, but how far can it take the cultural aspect into account?
I think the cultural aspect is tremendously important. So we work with many people from all around the world, including also the Middle East, for instance, or Japan. And these are very different populations culturally and also in terms of risk, health risks. And you have to take the cultural and the geographic aspects into consideration. In the Middle East, for instance, there's really a hugely growing population that develops diabetes, type 2 diabetes in particular. And so you, of course, have to be very attentive to that. On the other hand, when you have patients or clients from Japan, for instance, something that we would never think about here are gastroscopies and regular ones, because the risk there for various diseases in the field of, or in the area of your esophagus and gastric tract is just very much higher. So you have to take into consideration the geographic and the cultural aspects. And if we go back to the Middle East, for instance, we often forget that it gets extremely hot in the summer.
Mm.
And so when we say, why don't you just go and exercise a little bit or so forth, it's almost impossible to go and play tennis, or let's take tennis as an example. So there are not that many courts inside. They really have outside courts, but you're not going to play outside in 50 degrees Celsius, really. So you have to take that into consideration as well. And that's something we a lot of times forget. And so the geographic aspects and the cultural aspects are of tremendous importance when we develop training plans or also integrate lifestyle into medicine and the medical program that we're developing. So these aspects are crucial.
Who decides which way you're going to focus, where the spotlight is going to go? How do you decide? Is it obviously there's a financial imperative here, as with any study, but who makes that decision? How many of you come together to make that decision?
I think it's always an interdisciplinary approach. So it's not only medical experts in terms of trained medical expertise, trained medical professionals, but of course also coaches and nutritionists that are highly educated in their field. And so it's always teamwork. And in the end, however, the patient or the client herself decides. So based on recommendations, on interactions, on maybe sessions where we talk about various goals together. In the end, of course, the patient or the client decides her or himself what he wants to do.
And how involved are the clients in the process?
They're very. And I find it intriguing because I have the feeling that the more health literate the population becomes and the person becomes, the more they get involved and the more empowered they are to really also take action for themselves. And that might also be the trigger why they come to us in the first place. And I love it. I also love to be challenged when someone comes and he or she is very convinced about a certain therapy or treatment or program. It's fascinating to go in and discuss and see their viewpoints, what they've read, what kind of sources they've used, and then dig in and see whether that could be something really interesting for the particular person. And I love it. Some people feel threatened. Some people think it's not very comfortable when the client or the patient already has preconceived ideas. I tremendously enjoy it.
And have you had an example of that where somebody's come to you and said, this is exactly what's wrong with me, but I need it validated?
Well, that's already a step forward in a way. So if they come and they say, I know what I have, but I need to have it validated, that's extremely recommendable. But what they sometimes do is they say, I know what I have, and this is a medication I want, and then I will leave you alone. And that, of course, is then more challenging because it might not at all be the condition that they're actually suffering. So then you have to take a step back and reflect and try to provide evidence why it could be something else, and that's a little bit more complicated. But having said that, so many people nowadays are very health literate and are very open-minded, and in the end they come to you usually to find solutions together, not because they have preconceived diagnosis and treatment paths that they already want to implement. So I find it fascinating, and there are many examples. But usually when someone comes with a completely preconceived idea, usually they are quite symptomatic. So they have pain somewhere, they're suffering from something, and here, as an example, for instance, just because you have chest pain doesn't mean that you're suffering from a coronary artery disease or potential myocardial infarction. It can also be related to your stomach and your stomach production and stomach acid production and dyspepsia and heartburn. But it can also, of course, be something completely different, like a tumor or something pressing on your throat. So it could be the thyroid gland, or it could be. So there's different. If you look at the differential diagnosis, there are a lot of things that could cause chest pain or pulmonary embolism if they've just been flying transatlantic flights. So there, of course, you always have to be very, very careful and help to manage and guide.
It's so interesting because coming back to sport and the women in sport, there is so much that people know which can open the door to that. It means that sometimes doctors and medics like yourself are challenged, but doesn't mean that you have to know so much more. Is there going to be a tipping point where people know so much that it becomes confusing and that the power is with the person as opposed to the doctor?
Well, maybe you remember when you were in medical school, when I was in medical school, there was like an overload of information. So the first day that we were seeing patients, we had been in medical school for years already. We would bombarded with information, but it became completely overwhelming. So I see that with the students that I teach at an early stage of medical school. They are so overwhelmed with information that they can't really structure it and they can't really be effective. So if that happens to fourth, fifth year medical students, of course it will happen to the general population as well. There's so much information available, maybe so much that they can't structure it in any way, shape, or form. And that's why they go to a doctor. That's why they come to me to ask, or to our team to ask for guidance. And so absolutely, you can be completely overwhelmed. It can also be extremely stressful. Because once you start researching, you always find the worst case scenarios and the worst kind of cancers. And so it can be very overwhelming and very stressful. And therefore, I think it's very important to be able to go to healthcare professionals that can help you manage and navigate in this.
And do you think because there's all this help when it comes to sport, do you think there's a lot of expectation for sports people to always perform at their optimum? Because sport is one of those uniting events that happens in all communities, the Olympics or various games, as you call it, soccer. And in ice hockey, we don't do that so much over here because of the temperature and the weather. But everybody looks to sport. Just relieves that part of it's just entertainment. But is there more and more pressure on the sports person? Because I was looking at something with Simone Biles, the gymnast, and how she was performing every 4 years in Olympics, and the pressure that was on her, and eventually how she took a year off before and didn't go into the Olympics. And what I was so impressed by is that her coaches and everybody around her said, that's okay. You've got to do this. You've got to take care of yourself. But had she not had those people around her to support her, how would she have coped? And there were years ago when I presume that wouldn't have happened. But how much do you allow the individual to take responsibility for themselves? And at what point is it too much for them?
I think it's very dependent on age and discipline as well. So certain disciplines are notoriously rough, both for the body and for the mind, and a lot of pressure, also depending a little bit on the media attention, of course. There must be a huge mental pressure on the athlete. Tendentially, also, the more money is involved in a certain discipline, the more the pressure, or the higher the pressure can actually be. And then there are some disciplines where there's not so much pressure because they might not be of huge interest to the media. They might not be financially extremely interesting as a sports discipline, and there maybe there is more room for play and more room for more amateur like performance. But when we talk about sports, we don't, of course, only want to talk about top athletes. As you rightly say, sports, games have a huge impact and can potentially have a huge impact, positive impact on society, young people, keeping them off the streets, keeping them off certain criminal patterns, and can be very motivating. We also, there's a nice study that shows that a great majority of the women on C-level management boards, the great majority has been competitively involved in some kind of a team sport in their youth. And so team sports can be very, very, and that's also, of course, the origins of the Olympics, the modern Olympics, and the modern Olympic spirit. And that's the whole idea behind it: to unite people, to unite through sports, and to empower people and allow them to become the best that they can. So depending on the level, on the sport, on the discipline, you have totally different effects on the mental health and on also the physical health. But there are disciplines, again, gymnastics, one of them, and certain sub-disciplines of gymnastics, but also many others that can be very tolling for the body and for the mind, without a doubt. So I think we have to look at it very individually, and also based on which discipline, and also based on what level. We don't all have to become top athletes, really not.
And that's very important. You've touched on a number of areas that I really would like to go into here. One is the psychology of sport in leadership. We'll come to that. I'm also interested in the female body. We'll talk about that. But just as a segue, because you deal with drivers and the top drivers, don't you? You deal with, racing cars and Formula One drivers. Now, how fit do they have to? I mean, obviously, they have to be fairly fit because they won't sit in the car. But where does fitness play? And what is the balance between fitness and the mental agility of a Formula One driver?
Well, the Formula One drivers have to be extremely fit and tendentially quite light as well. You would be surprised how light they are, because that has an impact on how fast they can drive. The design of the car. So they have to be very fit, and they also have to be mentally extremely robust, because Formula One is a discipline with quite a lot of money involved, a lot of attention involved. So they are under pressure. They are under huge pressure. So there, you need to look at it from a holistic point of view. It's very important to have a family or someone close to you that's also within this support network. That has to be healthy. The entire social environment around you has to be healthy. Financially, obviously, it's very beneficial if there's some kind of a financial health aspect involved. Mental coaches are so important. Physiotherapy. So in terms of Formula One drivers, it's the entire network around them that has to be in place and has to be very professional. Eye coaches, eyesight, this is an important aspect as well. So mental coaching, physiotherapy, eye coaches.
Tell me about eye coaches, because this is the first time I've heard of that. I mean, I know that eye exercises are important, but tell me your experience with, and what is their experience of eye coaches?
Well, they need to be extremely quick, and one stimuli that's important when you need to act quickly is, of course, the visual stimuli. So that can be trained, and that not only in Formula One drivers. I mean, we also, I don't know if you're familiar with the 20-20-20 rule. So many of us sit in front of computers. We work. We have home office, or even if we're in the office, we sit for hours and hours and hours in front of our computer, and that's quite detrimental for your vision. So what we always recommend, based on the eye coaches also that we work with, is to plus minus work for 20 minutes, and then for 20 seconds, you look 20 meters in Switzerland, and then in most countries in Europe, as you know, we use meters, metric system. So 20 seconds, look 20 meters away from you, outside, out of a window or in the hallway. And then you can continue working again for 20 minutes. And you might say, well, that's impossible, but you can train yourself to take micro breaks and let your eyes rest and look far for a few seconds, 20 seconds. That's enough to improve and maintain your eye health. And so it's not only Formula One drivers that are obviously very dependent on vision, but we all profit from healthy eyesight.
Because we working with a computer is very different to working from a book, because you've got many screens. So you need different eye mechanisms, if you like. And this is where health is learning as we go along, because you're just getting the data of that, aren't you? So, you know, that must be coming in, and you in the top of your field must be sort of trying to find all that information and put it into something that you can quantify. But as I've heard you say, and all people in your field, all experts in your field, you have to have that validated. And you can't do that on your own. So when you have an idea yourself and you think, we need to look a little bit more about this, or this inspires you, as a lot of scientists do, and medical practitioners do, can you then go off and look at it? And can you have money that will support that? How difficult is it for you to implement, sort of investigation, research into something that you've looked at, that you know would be helpful for the future, for, sort of physically and medicine?
Well, we work in quite a networked fashion. So I do collaborate with various universities, and tendentially the universities, particularly when it comes to basic science research, you really need to go to the universities. The pharmaceutical industry is not too keen on a very early stage questions or early stage research projects, and so you need to be somehow affiliated to universities or similar organizations. And so we do that, and I sit on a few advisory boards. So if I have a really great idea, I can discuss it, and then there might be an interest out of that university or a certain doctoral student or master's student take it on and then work on that question. So it's not always so easy because you need the financing, but if you do it in a network kind of university setting, a lot of times it's you have students that want to take on that project, and so I think research, we need to create evidence and look for evidence when we introduce something new.
So it's coming back to the female. Something, obviously, I work with a lot of men and women. And of course, as a woman, and you know this, that there are, unlike men, we have a lot of internal changes that happen throughout our lives. And as you've said, our development starts in the womb. And I was listening to one of your interviews where you were talking about microbiome. And that again starts from birth and in the womb and so on. There is so much that happens inside a woman's body. Do you think it is daunting to the medical world to be able to actually work out the, as you say, the individual need for a woman? Because when I talk to women and talk about their hormones and talk about what's affecting them, and once they have hormone balancing, how that will affect their body and their minds. And this must be so much for the medical world to look at. Is it daunting? Is it too much? How long will it take?
No, I don't think it's daunting. I think we've haven't acknowledged particularly perimenopause and menopause for a long period of time. So I'm delighted to see that there's so much more interest nowadays in really looking into the hormonal life of each male and female individual, or all kinds of, I mean, in terms of sexes, we distinguish between those two, but then of course there are so many other gender medicine questions that we have to look at. I think it's fascinating, and I think it's wonderful that we are finally paying attention to that. Particularly when we talk about women, there's so much that happens during and then after menopause, and one of the perhaps arguably a bit daunting challenges is mental health and also brain health. So after that you've been through your menopause, the risk of developing dementia is so much higher in women than in men. Also depressive episodes and developments are the risk for that is so much higher. So we really, I can only welcome the medical and the entire society, if you wish, to really also pay attention to the female health and particularly also the huge hormonal changes that take place during menopause and the consequences of that. And there's so much we can do nowadays, so much. We don't have to be slaves of our hormones. We can really do a lot to improve our health and to in an individual fashion. So I think it's great. I mean, I'm actually quite excited about where we're
I'm excited, I must say, that there is this opportunity, because it just wasn't part of the everyday language.
Exactly.
Even recently, it's only just being sort of mentioned. But I know women that have gone into perimenopause at the late 30s, early 40s, and what this does to them. But do you think it would take women to champion that more?
I think there's quite a lot of attention in the field at the moment, and
There is. Okay.
I can only encourage even more attention and more focus, also from a research point of view, and that doesn't only go for the menopause or perimenopause, but in general, when we look at various drug trials or any kind of clinical trials, really, a lot of times the study population has completely excluded women. And so we don't even know whether a drug really works in women or not. And this is historically very true. And also here, it's really laudable to see that there's more and more determined action to involve women also as a part of research projects. I mean, this is in many ways clear. It has to be, but it hasn't been in the past. So there's also a foundation called the Women's Brain Foundation, which is doing so much work, both on a policy level, but also on research level, to make sure that women are integrated in research projects as researchers, but also as study population.
Yeah, because they do say that, and I'm sure you've noticed this when you're on the board, that women do have a slightly different approach. The studies have said that men are very much more, how is this going to benefit me, this project? And women are, what is the project? How does it benefit everybody else? And we need that tension of opposites to be discussed.
Absolutely. And we need the diversity.
We do.
And that means also including women.
Yeah, and coming back to your point about women doing sport and how that affects them in business. And when people look at employing somebody, to know that if somebody has been, I don't know what's your experience here, but if somebody has been a leader in their sport, I presume it's easier for them to be a leader in business.
Well, it seems to be that way, at least based on the research that I have seen. It's really mind-blowing how many of the C-level executives, female executives, have been in team sports. I myself come from the alpine skiing field, which is not really a team sport. So I really hope that also people that have not been in team sports are also equally fit to lead. But based on the research that I have seen, team sports are extremely beneficial when it comes to later in life, then really be able to lead teams. Well.
This is quite interesting what you're talking about. How much is nature and nurture? What opportunities do you take? So you are very much a self-starter in your sport. You can't ski with somebody else, can you? I mean, unless somebody needs you because they're blind or have some sort of impairment. But you are a lone person. You have to motivate yourself. You have to do the right twists and turns without somebody else guiding you. You don't have another voice in your head when you're doing all the sports that you're doing, when you were doing those. And that must have impacted your work today as well. You work as a consultant as well. And even on a board, you are an independent. You have to be seen independently to be able to stand up and have your voice heard. You're not part of a team that speaks to the team first and says, do we agree with this? So it's not a method of democracy. You have to stand up and be counted. And do you notice that your training as an independent sports person has affected your decision making now?
I love that question. I'm not totally sure. I'm not sure. My gut feeling is yes, but of course I can't really prove it. But maybe in a way I'm not so afraid of making decisions. So maybe the decision process is less complicated potentially. But whether that has to do with my upbringing or whether it's more nature, I don't know.
So were you encouraged to do the sport you were doing? Is it a family tradition?
Yes, it is.
And who was it? Your mother, father? Who was it in your family that did that?
Oh, my father and grandfather. Yes.
Yeah. So that masculine, sort of the father impact on your life was quite pronounced.
I think it was very pronounced. Absolutely.
And, sort of this is quite interesting, isn't it? Because if you have that and you have a balance of mother and father that help you psychologically and that encourage you, this is why fathers, I always say the mother is there to look after the child. The mother gives birth, or when that happens, let's keep it in the traditional terms, helps the child grow. And then the father takes them out into society in a way. More men are less risk averse. let's say. And if a woman gets an essence of that, that helps her make decisions. And decision making, very often for the woman at home, has to be for the family. Let's keep the family together. Let's make that. I'm not saying that men don't do that, but essentially, to have that male impetus as well is so important for women. To see what a man can do, to see what she can do, and to have that being encouraged. So for men, for a woman to have a male mentor is equally, I think, as important as to have a female mentor.
Well, I was very fortunate to have a very strong female mentor and a very strong male mentor, and so for me, it's difficult to say how that has impacted me because I had both. But again, when we talk about diversity, I think it's wonderful to have a diverse support network and motivating network, and so I can only encourage diversity.
So with your women's sports team, do they have both men and women as mentors?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Although the internet, so in terms of ice hockey, as I said before, IIHF, which is the international body, has various programs in place to really encourage and support female ice hockey, and there the mentors that come from all around the world. In our case, from Canada, that was a female, and I think it's also important to have a role model. So if your mentor is someone that you can look up to, that has a track record in what you are doing, that's quite a motivator. And so of course, if you're a female ice hockey player and you have a female mentor that has already achieved everything that you can achieve in the field of ice hockey, that's quite motivating.
Yeah, because you can see
relate.
Yeah, and you can see it can be done.
Yes, and you can see it can, and it has been done.
And it has been done. And it can propel you into doing more. That's why sport is so great and influences. We're coming close to the end of a very, very fascinating, I knew it would be, interview. What about you? What excites you in your day-to-day work? What in health excites you? And what is your purpose? Because we talk about longevity. And I always think, well, what's the purpose of what's the point of living a long time if you have no purpose?
So right. So for me, it's what I find fascinating at the moment is how quickly science is developing, and information and data we're provided with, or provide or discover on a daily basis, and to integrate that into medicine and medical practice is so fascinating. It's so fascinating. Also, various technologies that have developed in recent years that you can really also use in the innovation cycle, such as AI, for instance. It's absolutely, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. So I think that is fascinating. And what I personally like is to empower people. And there is so much interest. We're very fortunate to be living at the moment in a fairly stable society as compared to many others, and so we can really invest in our health and invest in our quality of life, and to empower people to do that. And it's not only for them; it's also for their families. It's also for their colleagues. It's also in organizations. Organizations are becoming more and more aware, and also in terms of risk mitigation, more and more aware that they need to invest in the well-being of their employees, and it's fascinating to see. I think it's a great direction that we're going in, and so for me it's wonderful to empower and to see how people then, with the tools and with the guidance, what they can reach. And actually, already in 1948, health was declared a human right. And if you look at the definition of health and what it entails, it was actually revolutionary already then. But then at that time, 1948, it was clearly stated that we all have the right to obtain our best possible health that we can as individuals. which also means optimizing health. It's not only about avoiding disease, or if you have a chronic disease, it's not only about avoiding unnecessary complications. Of course, that's the most important one, but it's also about optimizing your health and improving your quality of life. And so for me, when we talk about longevity, for me, health, that's what I'm really focused on. Lifespan, the maximum lifespan, the maximum age that we will reach at the moment seems to be 122 years. No one has ever become older than 122. But what we really can focus on, where we really can work and where we really can achieve something already today, is the health span, that we maintain a very good health ideally until the end. And this is what fascinates me, to really make sure that we can enjoy life and enjoy what we're doing, enjoy our families until a very, very late stage in life.
And that is powerful to have you as a role model and to mentor, but also to guide women into that area, because also you'll be overseeing the research that's going on for women in the medical field. This has been an absolute pleasure interviewing you, Dr. Anna Erat, and I know that we'll be doing more with you, and particularly in the field for women, women's medicine, but also their mental health and mentoring.
Well, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure. It's been wonderful to talk about these incredibly important topics with you, and particularly also female health. So thank you so much. Thank you.